All-news radio is a radio format devoted entirely to the discussion and broadcast of news. All-news radio is available in both local and syndicated forms, and is carried on both major U.S. satellite radio networks. All news stations can run the gamut from simulcasting an all-news television station like CNN, to a rip-and-read headline service, to stations that include live coverage of news events and long-form public affairs programming. Many stations brand themselves Newsradio but only run news during the morning and afternoon drive times, or in some cases, broadcast talk radio shows with frequent news updates. These stations are properly labeled as news talk stations. Also, some national public radio stations identify themselves as news and information stations, which means that in addition to running the NPR news magazines such as Morning Edition and All Things Considered, they run other information and public affairs programs. History. In 1960, KJBS Radio in San Francisco, California became KFAX and changed formats from a blend of music, news, and sports to trial the concept of a newspaper of the air. The call letters reflected the word facts. Quote, however, this experiment proved unsuccessful. Broadcasting pioneer Arthur W. Arundel is credited with establishing the first 24-hour all-news station in the United States in January 1961 on his owned and operated WAVA and WAVA-FM in Washington, D.C. The station met with success amongst an audience in the capital city, then riveted to news of the Vietnam War and of the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. Arundel helped other stations in New York and Chicago to convert to his all-news, all-the-time format, and then met direct competition from Washington Post-owned WTOP 1500 in 1969. Radio programmer Gordon McClendon, who has been credited with pioneering top 40, all sports, background music and telephone talk formats, is also an acknowledged pioneer in the all-news format. Extra News went on the air May 5, 1961 from XETRA, a station licensed to Tijuana, Mexico, whose 50,000-watt signal could be heard in San Diego and Los Angeles. Not long after, WNUS debuted in Chicago. The format, which can be heard to this day on many all-news stations, started each half-hour with world and national news from a national network, then switched to locally anchored area news, filling out the half-hour with updates on weather, sports, business and features. XETRA had no outside reporters and got all of its local news from the app and UPI wire services. Both stations operated using a 15-minute news cycle with newscasts repeated every 15 minutes. Another early prototypical all-news format operated through WABC-FM in New York City during the 114-day 1962 New York City newspaper strike, which lasted from December 8, 1962 to March 31, 1963. The format only lasted as long as the strike, though, and the station reverted to its regular format of Broadway show tunes and simulcasting of its AM sister station afterwards. The following year, ABC's Detroit FM station, WXYZ-FM, made a similar effort during a newspaper strike. Both stations, which previously had simulcast their AM sister stations, carried ABC radio network news programs. AM are local newscasts plus wire service stories read to fill the balance of the time. Group W, the broadcast division of Westinghouse, adopted an all-news format 20-minute cycle that eschewed network newscasts so that local and non-local news could be freely generally mixed, according to what appeared more interesting or important on any given day. Westinghouse also used field reporters at its all-news stations, which included 1010 WINS New York, KAYW Newsradio 1060 Philadelphia and KFWB News 98 Los Angeles. WINS began broadcasting its all-news format in April 1965. A second New York all-news station, CBS-owned WCBS, began all-news programming on August 28, 1967. CBS converted some of its other AM outlets to this WCBS Newsradio format over the next several months and years, including WBBM Chicago, KCBS San Francisco, KNX Los Angeles, and WEER 590 Boston. In 1975, the NBC radio network shut down its profitable weekend music and information service NBC Monitor to launch the News and AMP information service, the first all-news radio network. It closed 2 years later in a cost-cutting move, though it had strong ratings in some markets. In 1994, Associated Press launched an effort similar to NIS. Officially known as All News Radio, it had affiliates from coast to coast. However, it was informally better known by its promotional title of the news station. Associated Press discontinued the all-news format in July 2005. However, the Associated Press continued to offer top-of-the-hour updates, which are streamed 24/7 online. The last national all-news radio service in the United States, the audio feed of CNN Headline News, began a long phase-out in 2007. Headline News's audio feed was popular among some all-news stations, particularly after the app disbanded the format in 2005, until the TV network decided in 2006 to abandon its all-news format and add talk show programming in prime time. When many smaller stations do not have air staff and rely on a network feed, most of the Headline News affiliates became talk radio stations, with a handful of daytime-only stations keeping the feed. CNN also for a time offered a second all-news channel with the hour filled with CNN radio newscasts on the hour and half-hour and business, sports and feature segments from CNN radio and Headline News at specific points each hour, plus time segments for local news to be inserted. Many smaller affiliates, however, preferred Headline News audio, which was more suited to turnkey operation. CNN Radio ceased operations April 1, 2012, although CNN continues to stream an ad-supported audio simulcast of CNN on TuneIn Radio. While not a full-time NIS, the CBS radio network provides significant content for most all-news radio stations in the United States. Westwood and offers 2 morning news magazines on weekdays, which many talk radio stations air at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. The network's mobile app also contains a 24/7 stream featuring rolling news and features on a set schedule, along with breaking news coverage. All News has for years been a top-rated radio format in New York, Washington, D.C., and other cities, but as big city traffic worsens and people work longer hours, that increase the urgency of planning the day ahead. The focus of such stations has increasingly turned to traffic and to weather, updated every 10 minutes. Attempts at long-form commercial all-news stations, such as Washington Post Radio, have been largely unsuccessful. A newcomer to all-news in the early 2010s, Randy Michaels, acquired FM stations in New York, Chicago and Philadelphia in preparation for all news formats in those cities. Michaels gave up on the format after approximately 1 year and changed formats on both the New York and Chicago stations to music formats, later selling the stations off to other parties. Talk Radio Network launched America's Radio News Network, a 15-hour weekday block of news. In January 2011, the company had been launching 3-hour news blocks in specific day parts since January 2009. The network was syndicated mostly to smaller stations in need of turnkey news operations during the day. The network never produced programming for overnights or weekends. The service shut down in September 2013. In 2012, Cumulus Media added more all-news hours on KGO in San Francisco and KLIF in Dallas and switched WYAY Atlanta to all news under the branding News and AMP Information, but all three stations have since regressed back to news talk formats due to audience rejection of the format as presented on the stations, along with various position cuts by Cumulus due to budget issues. In September 2012, Clear Channel began a web-only all-news radio channel on iHeartRadio called 24/7 News. 24/7 News has since been customized for local cities in the top 20 radio markets. Stations. For a near-complete list of news talk radio stations, see category News and Talk Radio stations. Many all-news stations only operate as such during the daytime, or may preempt news with live sports coverage. To be included in this list, a station must broadcast all news programming during a majority of a normal broadcast day. All news stations and networks in the United States: WBZ, Boston, Massachusetts; WBBM, Chicago, Illinois; KRLD, Dallas, Texas; WWJ, Detroit, Michigan; WLRILP, Gap, Pennsylvania; KNX, Los Angeles, California; WCBS, New York City; WINS, New York City; KYW, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania; KQV, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania; KCBS, San Francisco, California; KOMO, Seattle, Washington; WTOP-FM, Washington, D.C. App Radio Network, National; Fox News Headlines 24/7 National; NBC News Radio, National; KSWD, Los Angeles, California. All news stations in Australia: ABC News Radio, National; RPH, capital cities and some regional centres. All news stations in Canada. Between 1977 and 1989, Canada All News Limited operated Canada's first attempt at all-news radio with a network of 8 FM stations and 1 AM station in major Canadian cities, all using the call letters CKO. The effort was similar in some ways to NBC Radio's news and information service, mostly national news programming with cut-ins for individual stations to broadcast local news. The network was also the first to offer live broadcasts of Question Time in the Canadian Parliament. The network was plagued by low ratings and poor advertising sales. Ironically, the stations listed below operate in cities which CKO News had served previously. Note: all are owned by Rogers Broadcasting unless noted. CFFR, Calgary, Alberta; CFDR, Toronto, Ontario; CKWX, Vancouver, British Columbia; CHQT, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. 360. Croydon, News Talk radio stations: 570 News in Kitchener, Waterloo, Ontario; News 95.7 in Halifax. Use an all-news wheel for the morning and afternoon shows, simulating the sister station. 680 News in Toronto, In February 2001, Chorus Entertainment launched an all-news sister station to Vancouver news talk station CKNW. All News NW2 was branded as 24-hour news radio, powered by CKNW. NW2 shared newsroom resources with CKNW, including several anchors and reporters. However, NW2 did not achieve broad appeal, and was shut down in May 2002. The station currently airs an all-traffic format under the call sign CHMJ. That same year, Chorus acquired two all-news stations in Montreal, CINW at 940 AM in English and CINF at 690 AM in French, which had launched in late 1999. These frequencies were previously operated by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's English and French radio services respectively before the public broadcaster switched to the FM dial. But as AM radio listenership in Montreal declined sharply in recent years, only long-time talk radio stations CJAD in English and CKAC in French remained popular. Neither CINW nor CINF were able to make a profit, and Chorus finally shut down both stations on January 29, 2010. All news stations in the United Kingdom: LBC News 1152 rolling news for London from 5 AM to 7 PM, with simulcast of LBC 97.3 at other times. All news stations in Germany. Most all news stations in Germany are operated by the local public broadcasters in the different states. Deutschlandfunk in all of Germany by Deutschlandradio. SWR Info in Baden-Württemberg and Rhineland-Palatinate broadcast by Südwestrundfunk. Info Radio from Broadcasting Berlin, Brandenburg Rundfunk Berlin Brandenburg. B5 Actual from Bavarian Broadcasting Bayerischer Rundfunk. Our Info from Hessian Broadcasting Hessischer Rundfunk. MDR Info from Central German Broadcasting Mitteldeutscher Rundfunk. NDR Info from North German Broadcasting Norddeutscher Rundfunk. All news stations in Italy. Radio 24, the main Italian private all-news radio, owned by the economical newspaper Il Sole 24 or Babilio News, Italian first local all-news radio in Genoa, Liguria. All news stations in Ireland. RTE Choice is a news service with news from around the world, including several broadcasts from international stations. RTE Radio 1 is a mixed-genre service, but it provides the most comprehensive news and current affairs coverage in the country. News Talk is an independent national all-news radio service operated by Communicorp. All news stations in France. France Info, Europe's first all-news radio station, broadcast since 1987. BFM Business Information. All news stations in the Netherlands. BN Nieuwsradio, non-stop news. All news radio stations in Norway. NRK Alltid Nyheter, NRK's all-news station. All news stations in Malaysia. Radio 24, all news station operated by State News Agency, Bernama. All news stations in the Philippines. AM band. Almost all AM stations in the Philippines are all news stations. The stations listed are flagship stations based in Manila. DWIZ 882. GMA Super Radio DZBB 594. RMNDZXL 558 kHz. DZRH, the oldest radio station. ABS-CBN DZMM Radio Patrol 630, the leading and outstanding AM station in Manila. Radio Inquirer 990. Radio Angbayan 738. Radio Agila DZEC 1062, DZRJ 810 AM The Voice of the Philippines. Action Radio, Sunshine Radio 1026 AM, DZAS 702 AM. Bombo Radio, FM band. Since 2009, key stations in the country in the FM band had begun a trend on an all-news radio in FM. This has a major advantage from AM because of high-quality broadcasting and penetrates all locations, unlike AM transmissions that are blocked by interference. Two major companies have the distinction of this format on the FM band: ABC Development Corporation Radio Cinco News FM, Brigada Mass Media Corporation Brigada News FM, all news stations in Nepal Image News FM, All News, Always News, all news stations in Spain Radio 5 Todo Noticias national news station from the Spanish public broadcaster, Catalunya Informació Catalan news station for Catalonia, Radio Andalusia Information regional news station for Andalusia, all news stations in China Beijing Xinwen Guangbo, Longguang Xinwen Wang, Dongguang Xinwen Tai, Tianjin Xinwen Guangbo, all news station in Korea YTN News FM 94.5.